Welcome to another quiet journey through forgotten history. Tonight, we open the heavy door of time and step gently into the cold silence beneath a medieval village where whispered prayers, unanswered footsteps, and names written in ink, now lost to dust, still echo in the dark. This is not a story of loud battles or famous kings. This is a slower story, a quieter one, the kind you feel in your bones more than you hear with your ears. So, settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let the room grow still. And if you find yourself drifting off before the story ends, that's perfectly all right. You are safe here. You are welcome here. And there's always more history waiting to be uncovered, one soft, slow step at a time. If you enjoy quiet tales from long ago, if the silence between the words speaks to you, consider subscribing. It helps keep these quiet stories alive, even the ones buried deepest in the dark. Now, let's descend into the cold silence of a witch trial dungeon. Underneath the old village, past the market square and behind the church, lies something few people speak of. At the back of a stone building, hidden behind a wooden door or under a trapdoor in the floor, is a staircase. It goes down, deep into the ground. Most people walk past it without noticing. But if you stop, if you open that old door, you'll feel it before you even step inside the cold air. The stillness. The steps are made of rough stone. They're worn down from years of feet, slow steps, heavy steps. Each one echoes, softly, as if even sound is afraid to stay down here too long. The deeper you go, the darker it becomes. No windows, no sunlight, just the faint glow of a candle if someone brings one. And even that light seems unsure. It flickers like it's thinking twice about staying. The air smells old, like wet stone, dust, and a little smoke from old torches. It's not a bad smell, but it's not comforting either. It's the kind of smell that tells you nothing here has moved for a very long time. At the bottom of the stairs is a narrow hallway. The walls are lined with wooden doors. Some are shut tight. Others creak slowly open. Each door leads to a small room, a cell. They're quiet, not peaceful but empty, still, like time stopped here, like voices were swallowed whole and never came back out. This was a place for people accused of witchcraft, not yet proven guilty, not yet proven innocent, just waiting. Down here there are no crowds shouting, no trials yet. Just cold stone, iron hinges, and silence so thick it feels alive. And here the story begins. In silence, the cell is small. Just a room carved into stone, not much bigger than a closet. There's no window, no bed, no fire. Only the damp floor covered in a layer of straw that smells faintly of mildew. It's flattened in the middle, where someone has sat or laid down again and again. There's nowhere else to go. You can't stand upright. You can't stretch. The walls feel close, pressing in. And yet, it's the silence that feels closest of all. A silence that isn't peaceful, it's heavy, like a thick blanket draped over everything. You can hear your own breathing, your heartbeat in your ears. That's it. The door is made of thick wood, with iron bands nailed across it. In the center is a small square hole covered by bars. No one explains why it's there. Maybe to pass food through, maybe to watch. Sometimes it's just a dark hole. You never know when an eye will appear behind it. Or a voice. People didn't scream here, not often. Not because they weren't afraid, but because the silence swallowed it. You could scream, and no one might hear, or worse, someone might. So most people whispered. Prayers, pleas, quiet things, just to break the stillness. Time didn't move here. You didn't know if it was day or night. You only knew when the candlelight came down the hall and when it left. That was all. The cell wasn't meant to punish you. It was meant to make you wait. Wait and wonder. What would they ask? Would you answer? Would it matter? In the quiet, your thoughts grew loud. Louder than chains, louder than footsteps. And in time, the silence didn't just surround you. It became a part of you. There is no sunlight down here. No warmth, no color. Just a flicker of flame from a candle or the soft orange glow of a torch when someone walks by. The light doesn't stay. It passes by like a ghost, leaving the darkness untouched. When it does come, it moves strangely. The flame dances as if nervous, as if it doesn't want to be here either. It throws long shadows onto the stone walls. The walls are not smooth, they are cracked and rough, like old skin. The light touches every uneven surface, creating strange shapes that shift and tremble. A single crack becomes a gaping mouth. A hook on the wall turns into a reaching hand. The shadows grow taller than the people who cast them. Sometimes the prisoner watches them move as if they're alive. In a place where nothing else moves, shadows can feel like company, but they are not friendly. They stretch across the floor, reaching toward the straw, curling around the bucket in the corner, sliding up the door. When the light goes out, the shadows stay. You can still feel them, even in full darkness. Still watching, still waiting. There's a torch bracket on the wall, but no one lights it anymore. Wax drips from a candle onto the stones. The shapes it makes are strange too, soft puddles of white frozen in place, like something was spilled but never cleaned. In a place where time forgets to pass, these flickers of light become something to watch, something to fear, something to keep your eyes open for, even when sleep tugs at you. Because in this dungeon it is not just the silence that speaks, it's the shadows too, and they have seen everything. Before you even hear the dungeon, before you feel the cold on your skin, you smell it. The scent drifts up the staircase like a whisper, old and steady. It smells like earth, but not the fresh kind. Not the smell of gardens or forests after rain. This is the smell of deep ground, of stone soaked in moisture and secrets. There is always dampness in the air. The walls sweat quietly. The straw on the floor never truly dries. If you pick it up, it crumbles in your hands, dark at the roots, heavy with time. Sometimes it smells faintly of rot. Not death exactly, but something old, something left behind. Iron adds its own scent, sharp and rusty. Chains left hanging, nails holding old wooden doors, sometimes a metal bucket. You don't need to see the iron to know it's nearby. The smell clings to everything. It fills your mouth as you breathe. There are other smells too. Wax from candles burned low, ink on parchment, the strange bitter scent of dried herbs, maybe from a healer, maybe from a priest. A warden once sprinkled dried rosemary in the corners, hoping to chase the dread away. It didn't work. The dungeon swallowed the scent within hours. And then there's the smell of fear, not always strong, but it lingers. On the walls, in the straw, and the bucket left in the corner, you might not notice it at first, but after a few hours or days, it becomes part of the air itself. Dry, sour, quiet. The kind of fear that doesn't scream, it just waits, breathing beside you. Down here, every breath tastes of stone, silence, and sorrow. And even when you leave, the smell follows, clinging to your clothes, clinging to your memory. Up above the dungeon, in a narrow room with thick beams and dusty shelves, sits the record keeper. He isn't a judge. He isn't a priest. He doesn't ask questions or pass judgment. His job is simple: write things down. He moves slowly, never in a rush. His robes are plain, his hands stained with ink. He dips his quill carefully, lets the ink gather, and writes each letter with steady strokes. Sometimes just a name, sometimes a short sentence, sometimes only a date and a single word. Confessed, refused, vanished. He keeps to himself. He doesn't talk much. But when he walks, his footsteps are the only sound above the dungeon that anyone hears. He walks across the wooden floorboards, and the creaks echo down through the stone, soft, slow, like a clock that doesn't care what time it is. The prisoners below listen for him. They learn the sound of his steps. He comes every day, always at the same hour. When the dungeon is silent, it is his footsteps that remind them the world still moves, that someone is still writing their story, or at least recording that they existed. Sometimes he pauses at the top of the stairs, listens, then turns back. Other times he leans down, watching through the trap door. You might see his boots. You might hear the quill scratching above you. But he never speaks to the prisoners, never answers when they beg, never offers a word of comfort. He is only there to write what happens, to keep the memory, even when no one else wants to. And when he's finished, he ties the parchment with string, places it on a shelf, and walks away, his footsteps fading into silence again. The dungeon remembers, and so does he. On a dusty shelf in the scribe's room sit piles of parchment, tied together with thin strands of string. They are not organized by emotion, not by sadness or fear, just dates, names, quiet records of people who once breathed in the dark. Each page looks the same old, a little yellowed, the ink faded to brown, but the handwriting is careful, steady, never rushed. A name is written at the top, beneath it a few short lines, maybe an age, a village, a charge, always written the same: witchcraft, sorcery, unnatural behavior, or sometimes simply suspicion. Some records are short, one line, just a name, then the word dead. Others go on longer, listing questions asked, words spoken, answers given, if any, but never emotion, never story, just facts, like items in a ledger. The most unsettling pages are the ones that end with a single word: vanished. No trial, no release. Just a person who disappeared into the stone and was never written about again. There are hundreds of names in these bundles. Some repeat mothers and daughters, whole families. Others are names no one speaks aloud anymore. Names that once belonged to people with homes, neighbors, hopes, small gardens, and favorite meals. But in these pages, all of that is gone. This is what remains: a name, a date, a decision. Nothing more. The paper crinkles softly when the scribe touches it. The ink smudges if his fingers linger. These pages hold no pictures, no stories, just silence pressed between fibers. But still, they are kept in a drawer, in a room above the dungeon, as if someone, somewhere, believed that even the forgotten deserve to be remembered, even if only by name, even if only in ink, even if only in silence. There's a room not far from the cells, not deep underground, but still closed off from the light. It's where the questions are asked. Not a courtroom. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a single candle burning low. The candle sits at the center of the table, leaning slightly, its wax pooling down one side like a slow river frozen in time. It flickers gently, throwing shadows across the walls. The flame is the only movement in the room. Everything else is still. This is where the prisoner is brought. Slowly, sometimes helped, sometimes dragged. They sit in the hard wooden chair, arms folded or chained. Their eyes are wide, adjusting to the change in light. No windows, no clocks, just the candle and the person sitting across from them. The interrogator doesn't yell. He speaks softly, calmly, gently even, but the questions are heavy. Simple words, but sharp. Names, places, who taught you, who else knows. Do you confess? Sometimes there's a book on the table, a Bible, or a ledger. Sometimes a feather and ink pot, and sometimes nothing at all. People think torture happened here, and sometimes it did, but not the kind with loud screams or broken bones. Number. It was slower, a silence stretched too far, a question asked 5 times, a chair with no backrest, a night with no sleep. The candle keeps dripping. The wax pools at the base, gathering in a wide ring. It's not cleaned, it's left there, a record in white, one for each night someone sat and spoke or refused to. When it's over, the prisoner is taken back to the cell. The candle stays, still burning, still watching. It has seen every answer, every denial, every silence that said too much. On the walls of the dungeon, hanging from thick iron bolts, are chains, heavy, cold, covered in rust. Some are looped neatly, others dangle, swaying just slightly when the air shifts. They catch the torchlight sometimes, and glint not brightly, just enough to remind you they're still there. Most of them were never used. They weren't needed. The chains were not meant for restraint. They were symbols, warnings. They told the prisoner what could happen even if it never did. The mere sight of them made people fall quiet, made them answer questions faster, made them confess things they weren't sure they even believed. Each chain has its own voice. When touched, it makes a hollow clink, a sound that seems too loud for such a quiet place. One small noise that echoes down the hall, bouncing off the stone like a dropped coin. There are cuffs with hinges, shackles with locks, long iron rings for ankles. Some are too high to reach, others lie on the ground, coiled like snakes, covered in dust, forgotten by the hands that once feared them. If you sat close to one long enough, you'd begin to imagine what it would feel like, that iron around your wrist, the cold bite of metal, the pressure on your bones, not from memory, but from the way the chain just waits. It doesn't move, but it wants to. Some prisoners would ask about the chains, others never dared to speak of them, but all of them saw them, felt them. Whether used or not, the chains were always there, silent, watching, like everything else in the dungeon. They didn't have to move to be feared. They only had to exist, and that was enough. In the far corner of every cell sat a wooden bucket. It was plain, made of slats, held together by a rusted band of iron. No lid, no handle. It wasn't meant for comfort or kindness. It was for waste, a reminder that time still passed, that the body still needed things, even when the world had forgotten you. The bucket was changed. Sometimes. Not daily. Not often. Just when someone remembered. Or when the smell got strong enough to rise from the stones and drift into the hallway. Next to the bucket, the corner was always dark, always damp. Water dripped there from somewhere above, a thin stream, steady and silent. It left a stain on the wall, green and gray and spreading like a quiet shadow. The straw in that corner was blackened, soft with rot. No one chose to sit near it. But when the cold grew too sharp, some crawled there anyway, just to feel the wet stone on their back, just to feel something. Sometimes mice came into the cells. Thin, pale things with twitching noses. They nibbled the edges of the straw or licked the side of the bucket. They were not feared. They were company. Small, living things that didn't ask questions or give orders. Just creatures passing through. One prisoner once named a mouse. She spoke to it each night, whispered stories, gave it crumbs from her bread. One day it didn't return. She never spoke again. The bucket, the damp, the straw, the mouse, they became part of the prisoner's world. A world reduced to a few feet of stone, and a corner where time pooled like water. Here, nothing was forgotten. Not even the things that seemed too small to matter. Because in the dungeon, everything mattered. Some nights, before the candlelight flickered down the stairway, the dungeon would fill with a low sound. Not footsteps, not chains. A voice quiet, trembling, almost too soft to hear. It was one of the wardens. An old man with tired hands and a crooked back. He whispered psalms as he walked the corridor. He didn't speak loudly. These weren't prayers for others to hear. They were for himself. Words he had memorized long ago. Bits of scripture, half forgotten, stitched together like old cloth. Though I walk through the valley, he would murmur. Or deliver me from my enemies. The prisoners listened. Some thought he prayed for them. Others thought he prayed for protection. A few believed he was trying to drown out something, only he could hear voices that came from the stone itself. Not every warden whispered psalms. Most were quiet, some were cruel, some were afraid. But this man, he was different. He brought bread gently. He left a small cross carved into the stone beside one cell. No one ever saw him do it, but it was there, just above the eye level of someone sitting on the floor. One night, he placed a single sprig of lavender beneath a sleeping girl's straw. It wasn't much, but in a place where nothing changed, even the smallest kindness felt like sunlight. He never stayed long, just long enough to whisper, to leave a crumb of hope, and then disappear up the stairs. The other wardens never spoke of him. And when he stopped coming one day, without reason, no one explained why. His footsteps never returned. His psalms faded into silence. But some prisoners remembered, and on certain nights, they whispered the verses themselves, quietly, so the walls would hear. On the table in the questioning room, a few objects were always there. Not many. Just enough to make the space feel colder, sharper. A leather-bound book, a metal scale, a shallow basin of water, some rope, a quill, and a pot of thick ink dried around the rim. During the day, these tools had purpose. They were used to ask questions, to write down answers, to measure things. Sometimes truth, sometimes guilt, sometimes fear. But at night, when no one was around, the tools stayed where they were, left out, not cleaned, not put away, just sitting silently in the candlelight as if they were waiting for the next voice, the next lie, the next confession whispered too quietly to be real. The scale would tilt with the slightest bump of the table. The basin, filled with still water, reflected the flame like a second, quieter light. The rope curled near the edge, its fibers stiff and fraying. A tool, yes, but also a threat, even when untouched. No one spoke of them aloud, but everyone noticed when something new appeared. A cloth, a wooden wedge, a sharpened stick. No one asked what it was for. They just stared, imagining. A prisoner once said that the tools talked to each other when no one was there. Not with voices, but with memories. They remembered every answer spoken near them, every pause, every tear. The air around them always felt tense, like a storm waiting to break. But the tools never moved. They didn't have to, because fear doesn't need action to grow. It just needs presence and a place to rest. And each night these tools rested in the open, quiet, patient, already telling the story of tomorrow before it began. If you look closely at the wooden doorframe of each cell, you'd find marks, not letters, not names, just scratches, tiny carvings made with fingernails, bits of stone, maybe even splinters from the straw bedding. No one taught the prisoners to make them. No one gave permission. But still, the marks appeared. Some were lines long and straight, stacked in rows of 5 like counting days. Others were jagged and random, pressed deep into the wood, like someone had carved them in frustration or fear. A few were almost careful. A star, a cross, a flower maybe, shapes that once meant something to someone. The wood was soft from age. Each new prisoner added their own scratch, sometimes over the last one. Layer upon layer, one history on top of another. You could run your fingers across it and feel the ridges like scars, each one quiet but full of meaning. Nobody ever talked about the marks. The guards ignored them. The record keeper never wrote them down. But the prisoners, they understood. When you sat alone for hours, for days, for weeks, the only thing you could control was your breath and the door in front of you. Some scratched out their fears, others their memories. Some marked each day they stayed alive. One cell had over 100 scratches. One prisoner counted them every morning. It was how she remembered her name. Another cell had just 3. No one knew what they meant. The marks didn't scream. They didn't demand attention. They simply stayed, quiet, etched into the wood, surviving long after the voices behind them had faded. They are still there, even now, faint but waiting, not to be understood, just to be seen, because silence leaves marks too. Once a day, or what felt like a day, a wooden tray slid across the stone floor. It carried 2 things, a small piece of bread and a little flask of pale yellow water. That was the meal, nothing more. The bread was dry, rough around the edges, and never warm. It crumbled easily. Sometimes it was hard as stone. But to someone who hadn't eaten in days, even the hardest crust felt like a feast. People would hold it gently, tearing off small pieces as slowly as possible, trying to make it last longer than their thoughts. The water was bitter. It smelled faintly like flowers and dirt. Dandelion water, they called it. Made from the roots of weeds, boiled and cooled. Some believed it calmed the nerves. Others believed it made the tongue loose, more willing to confess. It came in a flask made of dull glass, cloudy like the air in the cell. You could see bits of leaves floating near the bottom. Some prisoners drank it quickly, not caring about the taste. Others let it sit, saving it not out of hope, but because it gave them something to look forward to. One more sip before the light disappeared again. No one ever saw who left the tray. It came quietly, when the candlelight passed by the cell door. A shuffle, a soft thud, then silence again. It was a routine. Simple. But in the dungeon, routine was a kind of mercy. The bread and water did not offer comfort, but they reminded you that the world still existed, that your body still mattered, even just barely. And sometimes that was enough. Enough to keep breathing. Enough to keep waiting. Enough to keep hoping just for a moment more. When a priest came to the dungeon, the air changed. People felt it before they heard him. A different kind of silence filled the corridor, not heavy like fear, but softer, almost respectful. Even the rats seemed to disappear when he was near. He wore dark robes, faded from years of wear. His cross swung gently as he walked. In one hand, he carried a small book. In the other, a candle, or sometimes a vial of oil. He didn't rush. His steps were slow, steady, like a man walking through a graveyard. He didn't speak right away. He stood outside the cell door for a moment, listening, not for words, just for breathing. Then he'd step inside. He didn't preach. He didn't scold. He asked simple questions like, "Do you want to pray?" Or, "Would you like to confess?" Some answered, most didn't. He didn't push. He simply sat, the way a shepherd might sit beside a dying lamb. He read softly from the book's Psalms, most often, short verses. His voice never rose. It was low, like wind through tall grass, gentle, careful, kind. Sometimes he offered communion, just a crumb of bread, a drop of wine, sometimes just a blessing, traced in the air above their forehead. No matter what was said, he always left the same way, quiet, with one last glance back through the iron bars. No one ever thanked him aloud, but when he was gone, some prisoners closed their eyes, others wept silently. Some simply held their breath a little longer, as if trying to keep the feeling of peace just a while more. He never stayed long, but his presence lingered, like a light in a place that forgot what light felt like. A moment of grace in a world built from stone. Far above the dungeon, high above the village rooftops, stood a bell tower. Its stones were worn by wind and rain, its frame leaning just slightly from age. Most days, it was silent, still, just another part of the skyline that people forgot to look at. But when it rang, everything stopped. The sound wasn't sharp. It was deep, slow, one long toll at a time, rolling over the rooftops like a wave, not hurried, not joyful. The kind of sound that made birds fly from trees and shopkeepers pause with their hands mid-air. Down in the dungeon, the prisoners couldn't see the tower, but they felt the bell in their bones. The sound reached through the stone. It vibrated down the staircase, across the iron bars, into the cold floor beneath their bare feet. And they knew what it meant. Sometimes, the bell rang for fire, or for a death in the village. But most often it meant a trial was about to begin. Not a fair trial. Not the kind with lawyers and arguments and witnesses, just a hearing, a decision, a question asked 3 times and a silence mistaken for guilt. When the bell rang, the prisoners would sit up straighter. Some began to pray. Others stared at the door. Some closed their eyes tightly, as if pretending not to exist would make them invisible. No one ever knew whose name would be called next. The bell didn't speak names. It just rang. But the silence after it stopped, that was the hardest part. Because once the echo faded, footsteps always followed. A key would turn. A name would be spoken. And the stone walls, for a brief moment, would seem to lean in and listen. Just like the prisoners. Just like the bell itself. There was no grand courtroom for the trials. No wide hall with high windows or wooden benches filled with spectators. The room used for judgment was small, just a plain chamber above the dungeon, with a crooked wooden table, 3 chairs, and a candle that burned too low to truly light the room. The floor creaked. The walls were bare. There were no paintings, no banners, no cross on the wall. Just stone, wood, and the sound of papers being turned. The accused was brought in quietly, often barefoot, sometimes too weak to walk. They were led to a chair at the end of the table, across from 3 people who asked the same questions again and again. Do you confess? Who else was with you? How long have you practiced witchcraft? There was no defense. No one to speak on their behalf. Sometimes they were allowed to talk, sometimes not. Their voice didn't matter as much as the silence that followed their answers. In the corner sat the scribe, scratching words onto parchment with a tired quill. He never looked up. He simply wrote what was said word for word, as if each syllable was just another item in a long list of duties. There were no loud arguments, no shouting, just slow, measured voices, calm in the way that makes you feel colder, not warmer. Sometimes the trial lasted 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. The outcome was often known before the prisoner ever arrived. When it was over, the prisoner was led away, back to the cell, back to silence. And the candle burned lower on the table, dripping wax like it too had listened, like it knew what had just been decided. Because in that room, justice was never blind. It simply didn't look at you at all. In the far corner of the room where trials were held sat the scribe. He spoke to no one. He was not a judge, nor a priest, nor a warden. His job was quiet, and it suited him. He sat on a low stool beside a slanted wooden desk, his back hunched from years of bending over parchment. Beside him burned a small candle, always small, always almost gone. Its wick short, its wax dripping slowly onto the corner of the desk. The flame danced gently, casting his shadow over the words as he worked. He didn't react to what was said during the trials. Not when someone wept, not when someone confessed, not when someone begged for mercy. He simply dipped his quill, tapped it lightly on the edge of the inkwell, and wrote. The scratching of his pen was the only sound besides the voices. It was dry, rhythmic, soft, a sound like rain on dry leaves. Word by word, he captured everything, not with judgment, not with interest, just with duty. He wrote quickly, but carefully. He didn't erase, didn't correct. Each mistake was left as it was, sealed with the truth of the moment. When the parchment was full, he laid it aside, placed another down, and continued. Sometimes he stopped and stared at the candle, watching it melt, watching it lean. He never relit it when it burned too low. He simply replaced it with another, just as small, just as temporary. When the trial ended, he rolled up the papers, tied them with string, and placed them in a box beside his feet. No ceremony, no second glance. His work was done, and in the silence that followed, the only sound left was the soft crackle of a dying flame and ink drying in the dark. Sometimes, a prisoner simply disappeared. No bell rang, no trial was held, no candle was lit. One day a cell was occupied, the next it was empty. The guards said nothing. The scribes did not explain. The bucket was removed, the straw was swept away. A new prisoner might be brought in hours later, as if nothing had ever happened there at all. But the walls remembered. You could feel it in the air. The way the cold sat heavier than usual. The way the silence pressed more tightly against your chest. The stone floor still slightly warm in the space where a body had once lain. The faint shape of a handprint in the grime. Sometimes prisoners would whisper about the ones who vanished. She didn't confess, they'd say, or he knew something. But mostly they didn't speak at all, because talking about a vanished name meant remembering it. And remembering in a place like this could be dangerous. The scribe would cross out the name in his ledger, not erase it. Just draw a single line through it. No explanation, no note, just a thin black mark. One less name on the page. One more soul swallowed by stone. Some left behind small things, a carving on the wall, a torn scrap of cloth, a strand of hair caught in the wood of the door, traces, shadows, hints that they had once been real. But over time, even those faded. And so the dungeon moved on, quiet, still, unchanged, except for those who noticed the empty space, the echo that didn't echo back, the sense that something once filled the silence and now was gone. No bell, no fire, no grave, just a name once spoken, and then never spoken again. Long after the dungeon was sealed, after the trials stopped and the keys were lost, the place still breathed. Not in the way that lungs do, but in the way a memory does, soft, constant, impossible to silence. Visitors rarely came. A few curious historians, a few brave townsfolk. They stepped carefully, their footsteps echoing along the stone halls like soft taps on a forgotten drum. But what echoed back wasn't always their own sound. Some said they heard voices, not loud, just whispers, faint phrases too quiet to make sense, like someone was still answering a question that had been asked centuries ago. Others spoke of footsteps single slow, as if someone walked just ahead, always around the next corner. But no one was ever found. The air was still. Yet it moved in strange ways. A cold breeze where there was no opening. A sudden warmth near an old cell door. Shadows that seemed to flicker without light. Nothing ever rushed in the dungeon. It remained slow, heavy, watchful. The marks on the doors were still there. The scratches, the carvings, the silent stories. The wooden bucket was gone. The straw swept away. But the stone remained, and the stone remembered. Some say places can hold memories the way skin holds scars. Not always visible, not always understood, but always there. If you stand in the center of the corridor long enough, the silence grows louder. It presses close, as if waiting for you to speak first. And if you do speak even a whisper, it comes back to you. Not quite as you said it, slightly changed, as if someone, something, is still listening. Because down here, echoes never truly fade. They simply learn how to stay quiet, just like everything else. The door to the dungeon is heavier than it looks. Thick wood, darkened with age, its iron hinges grown stiff with time. It doesn't swing open, it groans, slowly, as if remembering all the times it was opened before. You step back through the narrow hall, past the empty cells, the silent corners, the candle that no longer burns. Your footsteps echo softly, just like theirs once did. But there is no one behind you, no voices ahead, just the stone, the dust, and the quiet weight of everything that happened here. The stairs rise in a tight spiral, and your legs feel heavier with each step, not from climbing, but from carrying all the stories back with you. The light from above is pale, cold, but still, it feels different than the glow of a torch. It reminds you that the outside world is still there, waiting, breathing, moving forward. And yet, when you reach the top and look back, there is a pull, a stillness that clings to your clothes, your skin, your memory, the kind of silence that doesn't end just because you've left the room. You reach for the door. It creaks as it begins to close. The sound is deep, long, final, and then it shuts. The latch clicks. The cold air is sealed below. The corridor disappears into darkness once more. No one speaks. The dungeon is quiet again, as it has always been, as it was built to be, holding its secrets in stone, letting time pass without measure, letting names fade like dust on old parchment. But even in the silence, something remains. A breath, a memory, a weight in the air. The door is closed. But the dungeon is never truly empty. Not really. Not ever.